Hello everyone, welcome back to Asturis in-city Skylines. We continued expanding the huge transportation hub in the previous episode. We added the main tram stations and also a bus station on the surface. The whole area now has so many different levels and it's already starting to look like a proper station, but it's still far from finished as it's a very big project. Today we will continue with something slightly different on the side of the station by building an Olympic stadium. Let's jump into it and I will explain the details as we build it. Alright, so the stadium project is not really going to be very disconnected from the main station because the levels and basically the pedestrian places, let's call them, and the green surfaces, those are pretty much going to extend past the station and into the stadium area because it's kind of going to be all interconnected, which is kind of going to be like a common theme for the rest of the center of the city because that kind of makes sense, Now, we are going to start by, placing the stadium building right away. So, it's this huge building that I really wanted to place somewhere in Asturis. I already downloaded it years ago, maybe, into Aurelia, but I don't think I placed it in Aurelia eventually. Yeah, I don't think I did, because it's just a very big building, and it's kind of difficult to place it when you are already, well into the series, because it's like a very, defining building for some kind of like a bigger area of the city. And when you already have, the bulk of the city done, it's not exactly easy to add these like huge buildings, right? But in Asturis, it's a completely different situation because we are just starting out. So it definitely makes sense to use some of these previously unused, huge structures. Now, this particular building has a very big potential. Right now, I don't particularly like how the colors look in combination with the station or the rest of the buildings that I'm going to be adding. But we are actually going to use procedural objects. I already did convert it into procedural objects. And by the way, that's only possible because now we have the sub-buildings, capacities or just capabilities to convert sub-buildings into procedural objects as well. So that basically enabled it. If it wasn't there, then I couldn't do it. And that's going to allow us to recolor some of the textures on the building. We're going to put some needed colors that are not really all that super present in this particular area. And since it's a huge building, obviously it's going to be like visible, on any kind of levels. If we even zoom out, it's just going to be probably the largest footprint building in the entire building or in the entire city, maybe not counting the space elevator, of course. Now, what exactly is happening over here? Because I kind of advanced already with building the plaza. So as you can see, and by the way, this is exactly something that I wanted to put here because we had that little opening. Well, actually not that little. It's that like a cut in these slightly rounded buildings. And it's like a passage for pedestrians from that outer platform, right? So it was always clear that there needs to be some kind of continuation of this pedestrian area or this like walkable plazas or something. And, what better place to do it than in front of some kind of a stadium. So that really felt fitting. I was at first thinking that we are going to put at the back of these angled buildings those tram stations because of that connection through those buildings. But we already did the tram stations in that wedge in the previous episode between the railways, which probably, is better. And this place then needed something different. So the stadium is absolutely perfect for it. Now, it might be a bit weird at first to think of this stadium or to have this stadium at the core of the city, but at the end of the day, it's kind of logical as well because it's right next to the main train station or any kind of station really, even to the trams and buses. So if there's going to be some kind of event like Olympic Games or some kind of games, doesn't matter, then people can obviously like majorly use public transport and just go into this area. So I don't really need to do the usual, American style stadiums, I suppose, with like huge parking lots all around them, which was kind of like a complaint with, for example, the Aurelia stadiums or sports area that I did, even though I think I did quite an extensive underground parking, but I suppose it still wasn't enough. But in this case, I'm not even needing to do that because I don't even need to do that because I have those public transport options. And since the stadium is just so huge, it's going to have multiple options for public transport connections because we obviously have that tram line going into this area, so it's also going to somewhat circle around this place. So, people can just get off at multiple points, multiple stops really, to reach the stadium from multiple directions. And today we are only going to do like 1/4 of the open areas around the station, so there's definitely room for many more connections, even pedestrian connections, not just public transport, from all places around the city. Now, you might think that the stadium is going to be a bit oversized for the overall scale of the city, and you are definitely right. It's going to be exactly the same situation as in Aurelia, for example, with the airport. The airport eventually was also just way too oversized for the actual size of the city in the game, but this kind of leads me back to explaining that Asturis and really any kind of city, big city in City Skylines, always is going to be underscaled, right? And it's just going to have large buildings that wouldn't realistically be built in such small cities. But that's just City Skylines. You cannot really do like realistically scaled big cities, right? You can only do like small towns and something. But if you want to do like a huge metropolis, you can only do it with like picking certain projects from the center, and that's about it. You cannot obviously build like, 1-to-1 size Tokyo, for example, or something. That's, even the map is not going to be large enough, and the limits are obviously not going to allow you. So that's perfectly fine. I'm absolutely fine with this. We are just going to use big buildings and, build like a very high density looking city, even though overall, if you zoom out, it's not going to be that big, but I don't really consider that to be a problem at all. Anyway, now we are going to focus more on the public transport and this particular tram stop. Now, I really wanted to have it on multiple levels, again, because we are kind of in that high-density center of the city still, and this place is obviously going to have, like, a lot of people going into the stadium from all kinds of directions. So it wouldn't really make sense to have this tram station or tram line just cut through the open areas so that people would need to cross the tracks on the same level or something like that. And it wouldn't even work because we have the trams going or approaching the area on different levels as well. So this is going to be absolutely perfect. Now, the way I'm doing it is basically trying to create like a level, the main level for the entrance into the stadium. And below that, there's going to be this level for the trams and like a smaller plaza as well. You could have seen me do that, do those stairs and like tiered areas. In front of the stadium, there are like shops or something, fan shops for like t-shirts and whatever, or maybe restaurants as well, something like that. I'm also considering, it's like a plan for the future, to have maybe some kind of pedestrian avenues running maybe below the stadium or something, because if you think about it, there is going to be that big park going from the main station in the direction of the space elevator, basically. And if you are going from the waterfront through this park underneath the station, then maybe there could be some kind of a corridor, like a continuation all the way even below this stadium, and probably with some kind of vertical connections towards the stadium and the events and everything. But this is like an opportunity to maybe create some kind of a pedestrian highway similar to Aurelia, only this time it's not really going to be just elevated and visible from everywhere, but it's just going to be like below everything, right? Below the high density stuff that we are building here. So for example, those very large stairs that are on the side of that very top area that I built in the beginning of the time lapse, those are kind of going towards that pedestrian corridor. It's kind of difficult to explain it at this point because obviously, like I said, it's going to be mostly just underneath all of this, and it's like a concept at this point. It's not really going to be functional anytime soon, I should probably say. But anyway, since I'm already well into the project of the station, I should probably explain this area a bit more and how it's supposed to work. So I'm considering Asturis to be like highly vertical, only in the center, in the direct center. And with this stadium project, we are basically ending that verticality area because I really need to think about just not extending the city like that much, right? Because I'm eventually going to run into some limits. FPS is already kind of starting to be an issue. So, I mean, not really that big of an issue, but I'm definitely, seeing a drop in this particular place. So I really need to not, overdo it with the area, with the scale, with the footprints. So this place is probably going to be the end of that. So I'm also, doing some terrain changes and kind of unifying some of these levels. So for example, the tram is eventually going to go to the street level. There is this main road that goes below the trams, kind of on the side. It's there's going to be like a park on the side of it or something. So there's going to be like a trench for that main avenue. And you could have seen me just use the network multi-tool to just fiddle with some heights and have like grades that are somewhat reasonable for the tracks and the roads. And we are just going to go into basically one level at some point, right? The trams are kind of going to be elevated for a while above the main avenue at least, so it doesn't really cross it. So we have more capacity on the roads. But otherwise, we are kind of starting to go slightly lower density and, fewer levels, which kind of makes sense. And this place right in front of the stadium is basically like a descent into some kind of a lower terrain area of the city, where we can just afford to have these different levels. And we are probably also going to decrease the amount of levels as we approach, for example, the waterfront or these kinds of places, right? So, as I said many times before already in the previous episode, this kind of planning is very important to, already do at this kind of start, because we are kind of at the start still. But I'm already definitely having a lot more ideas about how the city is going to continue compared to Aurelia project, for example. In there, I had absolutely no clue at these stages of the city. Now, enough of that. Let's focus more on what's actually happening here. So I think I was doing this on the live stream, changing the stadium building, because this is, by the way, a real-life building, or at least it's a planned real-life building that I think was scrapped eventually. I'm not exactly sure, but it's supposed to be the Tokyo Olympic Stadium, and it looks very different compared to this model that was made by Luminu, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not really sure. I'm probably going to type it in the video if I'm wrong about this one, but it's looking very different in real-life sketches, because it's supposed to have like very open entrances into the building with all kinds of these arches, and overall the roof of the building is just not really going, or the sides of the building are just not going down like this, straight down to the surface. There are just these kinds of openings, and the actual entrances into the building is like well into the footprint already. I'm not really sure if that makes sense, but that's basically what I'm trying to recreate over here, doing these kinds of like cuts inside the model, where we are eventually going to put some pedestrian paths after we get some population in the city, and just cross-connected all around the stadium. Like I said, there's probably going to be some kind of pedestrian infrastructure below the entire stadium, and it's probably going to exit, through these openings. And there are going to be so many different pedestrian options to walk through this area, which is hopefully going to bring a lot of people, like big crowds of people on all those open spaces, which is kind of the point of why I'm making them and why I'm trying to keep them reasonably empty, right? But as I said, right now the city is kind of focusing more on the big projects, and it's not really bringing in that population just yet. So, we are going to see these open spaces mostly empty at first, but don't worry, later it's definitely going to fill up. Now, this little park is actually one of my favorite parts of this entire project, because, oh yeah, and by the way, here I'm doing some kind of pillars. I finally decided to do them like angled like this and connected to the buildings. So, if you are looking at the cinematics and you don't see the pillars going and touching the ground, then this is the reason, because I'm making them part of the buildings. But anyway, the park, as you can see, it's filled with all kinds of exotic trees, like palm trees and everything. And so far, when we did the tram station, and even the stadium, you didn't really see where the city is located, but now it's more and more apparent, right? I'm just using all these palms, and it's just something completely different compared to Aurelia or Altengrad, where I'm using like the pine trees, or, the usual like, Northern European stuff or Central European stuff, where it's just the same, right? And right now it's just something different. Like I said, or Asturis is supposed to be in like some kind of subtropical, tropical region, and this particular park is immediately reminding us where Asturis might be, right? I'm not really claiming that it's anywhere in particular in real world, but some of that general region, it's definitely somewhere around there. And that park is just looking great. I really like how those trees look. It's something just, completely different. And it's just looking great. I don't know what else to say. Probably already said it a million times, but it's just great. Now, I don't really want to just build the stadium today. So we are also going to focus on some of the building blocks, because thinking back to Aurelia, and I'm going to be talking about Aurelia a long time, or many times, because I definitely have a lot of experience, bad ones, good ones as well, from doing that series, so that I already know how I need to do certain things. So, for example, when I do the stadium, which is like a one of a kind project in the city, I also kind of need to start thinking about the filler areas around it, right? Because that's inevitable. Asturis, just like Aurelia at the downtown, is supposed to be like a very high density city, and some of these blocks are not going to be like super interesting or the main focus of some of these areas. So the focus is obviously going to be on the stadium, on the stations, on the infrastructure, but all around it we do need that quantity, right, of the high density stuff, because that's really going to make it stand out a lot more, the rest of the projects. So that's exactly what's going on over here. I'm trying to put together some high-density blocks. Like I mentioned, I'm already thinking of this area as some kind of an edge of the downtown, so I'm not really trying to put anything super tall in here, and we're going to just keep those really tall skyscrapers towards the waterfront areas a bit more, or at least the opposite end of the main transportation hub, right? This place, not so much. So just trying to fill this place with random buildings, trying to use mostly residential buildings, because as we can see, we have a very high residential demand, because we also need to fill all those industrial and office areas in the elevator, right? By the way, after today's episode, the elevator is still not going to be accessible, but we are going to focus on connecting the station for the flying train with the rest of the city in the next episode, right? So then we finally going to connect the space elevator properly, and going to kind of start thinking about, making the city functional as it should be in the game. So, for example, this little block, it was kind of cut by the railway coming from the main station. And by the way, I put that very nice looking like a sound barrier on the side. It's supposed to be a highway sound barrier, Japanese one, I believe. And I put it here around the train, and it's just looking great. It's just looking so good. I don't want to put it absolutely everywhere around every piece of track in the city, because more variety. But in this particular place, I'm thinking that these buildings might be something mostly residential, so it just makes a lot of sense. And if I'm ever going to do a first-person ride, then there is that like a glass window running, like a strip of glass running all along that sound barrier. So if I'm going to play with the camera settings, we are just going to see through that window, and it's going to look really good. So we're not really blocking out the view, which is just great. And overall, it's just giving some kind of more volume to the entire, especially like vertical volume, I suppose, to the entire corridor of the trains. So it's just making it look very, very good. Now, the reason why I also wanted to recolor that stadium building is that it's going to bring in some more colors. Like you could have seen me, for example, introduce like a very blue, not so bright, but kind of darkish actually, blue color around the stadium. You can probably already see that in the thumbnail, and in the cinematics you definitely will, that it's bringing that very needed dark blue color in the entire area, because we already have the green, of course. It's also worth to keep in mind that there's not really going to be that much green, because obviously it's going to be more like built as further we go. But we have the green for the surfaces, that's definitely going to stay, and now we have the blue for the stadium. And we kind of have some like red orange-ish tones for all kinds of details, and especially the gravel for the railway. So this is going to be the transition, and you can definitely see that the colors are definitely what they now need to be. All right, so this is the finished area. As you can see, we did really build a lot of footprint today, because not only because of the stadium, but also all those building blocks, and they're kind of starting to already give you an idea how the rest of the area is going to continue, because I don't really want to do any kind of like super crazy shapes in terms of the city blocks. So we are kind of going to do certain grids for these center areas, but I don't want to stay in them, and I definitely don't want to do like 90-degree corners all the time, because I have surprisingly good amount of buildings that are going to fit the non-90-degree corners, like for example that building, the towers in the center in here. Those are, very nice looking, very fitting into that particular area. Yeah, this is the park that I talked about. I really like it. I just really, really like the palm trees, and especially the rocks in combination with the rocks. I'm really looking forward to do some kind of those slopes on the mountainy areas of the map, because that's where I'm definitely going to use these kinds of rocks in combination with some kind of infrastructure just going, kind of twisting between all the terrain changes and all these just rock details and everything. Really looking forward to that natural detailing. So this is the tram station. As you can see, there is the globe, which is actually turning. Maybe you don't really see it in the cinematics because it's really, really slow, but that's kind of like a first this kind of like holographic ad or art that I placed in the city. I definitely do plan to add a lot more than just that, because I also want to use them to introduce the different colors. Right now I didn't really bother with it too much because I thought this place is okay. Right now it's obviously super empty, but I didn't want to clutter the open areas too much at this point, because I'm thinking that that place is going to receive a lot of pedestrians. Not only going to the stadium, which I'm probably going to just improve by adding some maybe like commercial blocks or something inside the building, so there's actual purpose of people going in there. Maybe I could turn it into a park and put some kind of entertainment buildings inside and, do all those kinds of park people's generators on the open spaces, but all in good time when we finally have some population in the city, some serious population in the city, and we can start filling all those areas with lots of people. So that's pretty much the same story with the train stations, the different platforms, and all the rest of the open areas all around the city. All right. So, in the next episode, we are actually going to focus on this place that you can see in the cinematic, mostly around that flying train station for the blue line, right? Which has the blue roof, because it's just another place around the station that I would really like to continue, and I do have some plans for continuing that tram line, actually the same line that we continued today that goes to the stadium. And of course we are going to continue adding a couple more of these blocks of buildings around it, and it's really going to start looking really good. It already does. I'm really satisfied with the results so far. The station, how it's just the main focus on the place, it's just really good. I like it. Anyway, that is going to be all for today's episode of Asturis. Thank you for watching it. Hope you liked it. If you did, then you can do the usual. Thumbs up below the video, leave a comment, share it, or subscribe if you're new here and you want to see more. And if you really like it, then you can become a channel member either through the join button below or the link in the description. Big thanks to all the members that we currently have. I really appreciate all your support. Thank you so much. That's going to be all. Take care and goodbye.